When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello and welcome to What the Fox podcast with your two hosts, Lindsay Fox and Amber Ross. As a reminder, today's episode is sponsored by Therapy Appointment, as well as ConsciousHealers.com. So with that being said, we want to introduce our guest speaker for today, who is truly a pleasure to have on. His name is Nick Tucker. And Nick, I kind of would like to have you take a moment just to share, who are you? Who are you in terms of your bio and just a couple of sentences about who you are? Because I feel like there's so much about you. I honestly don't know how to condense it.
Look, who am I? I've been trying to answer that question for 35 years. Maybe not 35, not since I was born, but a long time. Today, when people ask me who I am, I like to say first and foremost, I'm a father and a husband. You know, family is everything to me. I run a youth camp here in Los Angeles for kids 6 to 14. That's how I make my living. And I also have just kind of launched my public speaking career. So I go into schools and I talk about emotional health and resilience and how they're linked together. And that's who I am. In a nutshell, I have a dog.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Nick, we're thrilled to have you on. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I
So
feel like
wait a minute, because I can't. We started to try to get into things before we hit record, and I haven't asked this question in a while, so I'm throwing it out today. Lindsay and Nick, how the heck did y'all meet? Because a theme here, Nick, in case you're not aware, Lindsay meets some of the most radical and amazing and influential and just superhumans. So I have to know, how did you two get connected?
So I'll start. And then Lindsay, you jump in because it's
been a while. It's okay. We'll just see what we remember or make up what we don't.
I had a friend from school, Allison Tagliati, and we used to go over her house for barbecues and things of that nature. So I was there for a barbecue, and she was there with her then boyfriend, Greg, now husband, and they brought Lindsay. And I didn't know Lindsay. I'm like, who's this girl with this Southern accent? And here she is just there. And I didn't really know how she fit into the equation. And I was just about to learn myself.
I love it. I love it so much. All right, Lindsay, what's your half of that story?
And wait, were we in Maine or New Hampshire?
We were in Maine.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So this is whenever I lived in Boston. And funny enough, as if this is how I meet amazing people. It's a random happenstance type of situations. You never know how you're going to meet, when you're going to kind of reconvene or reconnect later in life. And I feel like that's where the magic happens. So with that, I actually used to be best friends with a person who I did go to high school with. And we actually stopped having that friendship. We stopped being friends altogether. We did not stay in touch. However, I became super, super close with her aunt. And she was like a mom to me. And while I haven't really gotten into my full story here on the podcast, I have shared bits and pieces, but I had a lot of a lot of adoptive parents of my own to just kind of take me in and just love me. And they were just amazing people. And this woman was one of those people. And she actually used to talk about Allison all the time. And she always said, Lindsay, you really have to meet Allison. You have to meet Allison. I really think you and Allison would be good friends. And she said, hey, why don't you come up from Boston? I really want you to meet Allison. We're going to be in Maine to go to this cookout. And voila, that's how Nick and I met.
That's very cool.
Okay.
That makes sense. Oh, go ahead.
You collect families too.
Oh, I am very good at collecting families.
We can get into that. I love collecting families.
I do too. It builds with resiliency. It shapes who we are. It aids in so many different areas of our life because you can see how other people live. So even if you yourself and your own family feels dysfunctional, every family is dysfunctional, and you get to see how every family operates. And it's like, oh, okay. All right. So we're just human. I get it. Not so
I
bad.
love that. You collect families. That's such a good way
Yeah.
to put that. And I can see, like, in my own history, my family collected people. Like, we were collectors of humans that were amazing and just came from different walks of life. And I love how, like, all sides of that ebb and flow together.
Well, speaking of walks of life, it was your walk, Nick, that actually you were contemplating or like really wanting to do at that time whenever I met you. And so for our,
Okay.
right, in terms of like the
Yeah,
timeline,
I
just to
was
kind
trying
of,
to remember when I met you, but yeah, that would have been right around that time.
yeah. So I I want you to share the walk that I'm referencing, and then I will complete the other train of thought that's going on with how we met.
Okay, so
What walk am I talking about?
does Amber know?
I
Your
know a
viewers don't
little.
know. So,
Yeah, the listeners don't know. I know a little bit about it just because Lindsay was like bubbling over with excitement when we were talking about bringing you onto the
I
podcast.
was
So
like,
she
this guy
shared a
had
little bit.
I was like, this guy had the craziest idea. And what was your crazy idea, Nick?
it was
Tell
to
us.
walk from Maine to California.
How many miles is that?
When it was all said and done, it ended up being around 3,400 miles. And I did it with my best friend from high school. And we also went to college together. His name is Sam. And it was just like, I just graduated college. I was
Uh-huh.
waiting to hear back from this Watson fellowship that was going to give me a grant. It gives a certain amount of people a grant for $25,000 to go overseas and do a project of your creation, but you just can't come back to your home country during that year. And my professors thought I was going to get it. My advisor thought I was going to get it. And I thought I was going to get it. But in the meantime, I had read this book about this person. It was a fictional book. I read this book about this guy who lost everything and walked across the country because he just lost
Because that's
everything.
what you
He didn't
do.
even
Yeah.
he didn't even know what else to do.
Yeah.
And I had
Spiritual
just
pilgrimage.
I just completed college. I suffered some loss in college, which I imagine we'll get into. And I was just trying to find my way. So whether it was going to be the fellowship or the walk, I was going to do something. I didn't get the fellowship, so I'm like, gosh darn it, I'm going to walk across the country. And my best friend's like, you know what? I hate working in insurance. I'm going to quit and I'm going to do it with you. So
And that's when we met.
yeah,
So
that's when we
That
met.
is so intense and so amazing. Like, you guys don't know this, but I have a map of the United States like right behind my computer. So as you're saying that, I'm looking at that like space from those two places. How
Amber,
was that?
check this out. So we're like 3 weeks in, maybe 3.5 weeks in. We're down in like Avon, Connecticut area, and we're being put up in a nice house by a Colby alum. I went to Colby College, so it was a parent of a Colby alumni
Very
who was
cool.
putting us up for the night. And this happened all throughout like the Northeast. We didn't spend one night outside through New Jersey, but we were being put up in a home, and we were being sent to the basement. I know that sounds bad, but it wasn't. We were being sent to the basement to unload our stuff so we could shower and then have dinner. And as I'm going down, there's this map of the United States on the wall. And I stop. And our legs are killing us. And my feet effing hurt. And I have blisters. We didn't have the right shoes. And I take my finger and I go like this. Okay, Southern Maine. We started at York Beach. And then here's like Avon, Connecticut. And it was this. And we felt so tired. And then I saw how much we had to go. And you can't see on the camera, but it was off the camera. And that's all we had done. And I'm just
Right,
like,
this little chunk of the map.
You're
yeah,
like,
I'm
why
like,
are we doing this?
what the hell have we gotten ourselves into?
Yes. I mean, so when we first met, you said, Lindsay, do you want to walk with us? And I
Did
was
I?
like, yes. That's why I'm saying, like, this is how we ended up staying in touch, is because you were saying, like, listen, I'm serious. I'm going to leave in probably a month or so. Like, let me know if you're interested.
That would
And
make sense because we
I,
left
re-
August 6th and we probably met in that summer.
yes. And so I genuinely gave this a lot of thought. I mean, I was in this similar kind of phase in life where I was like, I can do this right now. And I talked to the said adopted aunt about this, saying like, I really want to do this. I really want to do this. And then I was like, I don't know. It's gonna be Nick and this other guy. I don't really know them. I mean, I'd get to know them on this long ass walk.
Clearly,
Um,
very well.
but then in my brain, I was like, I don't know. This might mean like we're gonna sleep on like the side of the street or in a desert or like not have food. And I don't really
Yeah.
know because you had been really transparent and saying like, well, we're just hoping to like, get money donated and we'll just like figure it out as we go. And I was like, I mean, I'm all about that hippie life, but that was like next level shit.
Well, can I share a memory with you?
Yes,
Yes.
please.
So I remember, I just have like flashes of memories from that barbecue where you visited, and you had short hair at the time.
Hmm.
And I remember you kind of like, at one point you were off by yourself and you're just like staring off into the distance. I was like, what is going through this girl's head? You're
It's a good
you're
question.
like deeply contemplating something. And I don't know if it was before I had shared the walk with you or after, or that was just like the point in life you were in. You were just
Yeah.
like meditating on something.
It
But
sounds like me all the time.
maybe that's what I sensed. I was like, this girl is ready to walk across the country with two male strangers.
And honestly, to this day, I just want to say this. This is one of my regrets. I regret not doing that with you. I really do. It was something I really, really wanted to do. And I knew without a shadow of my doubt, like shadow of a doubt, that it was going to be a life-changing experience for you two. Um, and I followed your journey. I watched it. I was a vicarious attendee. And I just, to this day, I say, wow, I really wish that I did it. And so much of me was just like, I'll just root them on from afar. And I feel that there was a lot for me to learn by choosing to listen to the fear. Right. I allowed fear to rule my decision making with something that I really, really thought would be one of the coolest things ever. And it's something I've reflected on, and it's really guided some decision making for me, or it did from that point forward of
Yeah.
do not let your fear dictate your
Yep.
decision making. Don't let that fear stop you from just diving into the deep end whenever you know that there's an opportunity right there calling.
No,
Don't pass it up.
We had to overcome some fear just to take the first steps. And it's not always boogeyman fear. Sometimes it's just like worry. You're just worried
Yep.
about finances.
Mhm.
And I think by the time we met, we were at the point where we had, knocked on doors of businesses. And I think we had raised around $3,000. And to our calculations, it was going to take $15,000 to get
Yeah.
us across the country with enough
Wow.
food, staying in motels. But
Assuming there's no medical disaster.
Right.
Yeah.
Assuming-
Right.
I think Obamacare had kicked in, so we were both insured at least. We weren't 26 yet. But we had like $3,500 raised. Our roommate from college was working for this ghostwriter in New York City. And we were going down, and we talked to him a few times about what we were doing. And we went down to New York City, and we had lunch with him and our roommate. And we're like, yeah, we just don't have enough money. And he said this to us, and I've kind of carried this with me my whole life. He's like, if people waited until they knew something wouldn't fall apart, nothing would ever get done.
That is so true.
So after
That
we
is.
left, we set a date for August 6th. We're like, I don't care how much money we raise, we're just gonna go.
Yep.
And it'll work out. And it did. I think by the end, we raised money along the way. People like fed us, they put us up.
Yes.
I think we had like a couple $100 left over that kept our website going for a few months.
Very
It's
cool.
like-
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. It was really a powerful journey to witness as well, because I think just as an outsider looking in, I thought, wow, they are restoring my faith in humanity. And a big part of what you had called this was like, this was your journey to rediscover the American dream.
Yeah.
You wanted to, see and get that whole sense of humanity restored yourself, and you got it in like such an amazingly unique way.
That's a good reminder. It's like, it's funny when you ask me to tell the listeners about myself, I left that out. And sometimes I just forget, like I did that.
Yeah,
And-
you
and-
walked
and-
You
from
did
Maine
a
to-
huge thing. Like, I
You walked
am not sure how many people would actually do that, and like, or how many people might say it's a good idea, but to actually say, this is the date, this is when it's happening, don't care what else is going on.
Mhm.
And also, I'm going to choose like the hottest month of the year. I'm from the South, so I know it's
Yeah.
different everywhere else, but like August.
Brutal.
Yeah, there were some hot days, but we had to take into account, like if we didn't leave then,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know, we get stuck in the north during,
Right.
and actually we had a route that I like kind of half-assedly mapped out, and I had an alternate route.
Cool.
But
Because that's how the whole plan was.
we ended up going through two cities that were on my initial route, and that was Columbus, Ohio, and Los Angeles, California, which is where we were ending. So that one doesn't even really count. We got to Columbus, Ohio, and that my cousin, he lived there. We stayed with him for a few days. We volunteered at a nursing home, and then we were like, it was October. We're like, it's cold. We got to like get south quick. So we just headed straight south through Cincinnati, through Covington, Kentucky, through Tennessee, through Arkansas, down into Texas, and then we really started west again. So we went through the high desert, and
See,
yeah,
that's
talk
what I
about
kept picturing. I literally kept picturing. I was like, we're gonna be sleeping in the desert. I guarantee
Yeah.
we're gonna be sleeping in
We're
the
going to
desert.
be sleeping in the desert. That's what Lindsay's
like-
worried about. Okay.
we slept in the desert a lot. I mean, we were in the desert for like 1,500 miles, and we'd hop over the barbed wire fence, and we were just in the desert, like coyotes in the distance.
I have
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
many questions. Like, how did you stay sane on this pilgrimage? Like,
Well, Sam and I,
in my brain, like, I am already horrified at sleeping in the desert one night, and you guys have already trekked through like cold northern, and then you go south. Like, I don't know. How did you not lose your mind?
so walking's very boring,
Yeah.
and
Well,
Sam's my
it
best
can
friend.
be,
Yeah,
but you're
Sure,
my
to
best friend with you.
Yeah.
I would imagine walking from Maine to Santa Monica
but-
Pier, it would be.
you know, we're walking 12 to 16 hours a day. We only have so much to talk about. So there's a lot of just like walking and thinking.
Oh,
And like, I mean, just think of being on the road for half of the day with the same person for 7 months. Like we actually got along really well. That wasn't a problem, but there was a lot of boredom to overcome. You know, I think we were both kind of lucky that we were in one of those periods of our lives where we're very inwardly focused and introspective, just reflecting on our lives and what we wanted to do, where we wanted to go in life. You know, he had graduated 6 months prior to me, so he graduated on time, and he had joined one of those insurance firms that is 100% commission to a 22-year-old young adult. And I mean, he was so stressed, he got shingles at 22.
Yep.
Oh my gosh.
You know.
Oh my gosh.
So like he was ready to do this, and we were just
Yeah.
trying to figure out life. And for me and my past and what I had walked through,
Ha,
unintended.
ha, ha.
Yeah,
Ooh,
intended.
you
It
got
was like
dad
that-
jokes.
Yeah.
You
That
got
was
dad
funny.
jokes.
Oh, I had them before my son.
I
But-
love dad jokes.
Me too.
Oh,
Me too.
Coven.
I got a couple dad joke books for Christmas. A
So-
couple Christmases ago.
Dad jokes are amazing, and they are like a fact of life. I'm sad that there's not more emphasis on mom jokes though, because like moms rock too. But
They do.
you alluded to like your past and your history, and obviously like we started off this podcast and we kind of jumped ahead many years. But
Yeah.
do you want to share a little bit about like what your childhood and like early adolescence, what led to this walk? Because like there had to have been some connection, right? Or Lindsay, you
Yeah. I mean, go ahead,
and or
Lindsay.
collection of families. So,
Yeah,
led to
that
the walk
too.
and or collection of families. Like if you were to describe yourself as a kiddo, how would you describe yourself as a kiddo? You know, with the benefit of hindsight, of course, and then
Yeah.
maybe how would the people in your life have described you as a kiddo? You know, what did your childhood look like?
Yeah. I mean, I'll get to that, but to walk across the country, a lot of people ask like, why? Like, how did you get to the point where you made that decision? And I've had to reflect on that. So me as a kid, man, I had many faces as a
Mhm.
kid. So it depends on who you ask. But
Yeah.
I mean, my early childhood, I mean, I was taken away from my mother like weeks after I was born. So I was born to a single mom. a feisty Italian Sicilian woman. But she was an addict. She was a heroin addict, and she used throughout her pregnancy with me. So I was born a couple months premature. I was like addicted to narcotics, and I had died, but obviously I'm here, so I didn't stay dead.
Yeah.
Wow.
But I was in the
Wow.
NICU for a month plus, and my mother was detoxing during that time. So I was sent home with her, but she couldn't quite stay off the drugs. So I think within a week or two, I was taken by the state of Massachusetts, and my father was in prison at this time. He also suffered from addiction. But I was put into foster care, and then somehow, some way, this family, the Lorians, Lisa and Paul, and their 3 children at the time, but they have 4 biological children. They were a part of a church in Woburn, Massachusetts, and they were sent with some money because my Nana was a snowbird. She was in Florida at the time. My Nana contacted this church and asked if they could get money to her daughter, which was my mother. So they sent Lisa, who is my guardian, and there's such a complicated story. I'm sorry. This is the long version.
You're doing great.
You're doing great. I'm with you.
So
Yep.
they sent Lisa to Lynn, Massachusetts. And for those of you who don't know anything about Lynn, it's like Lynn, the city is saying you don't come out the way you went in.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's more to that. But they sent her to Lynn, and Lisa knocks on the door. My mother answers, and my mother just breaks down crying. It's like they took my son. And Lisa, the way Lisa described it to me, it's like my mother was unkept. The apartment was a mess. There were like dishes stacking on. And, Lisa grew up in New Hampshire. She bounced around. She had alcoholic parents. So she had some experience with addiction, but still her mind first went to judgment and then went to more grace. She's like, if it wasn't for the grace of God, this could be me. So she like rolled up her sleeves, started doing the dishes, listened to my mother just pour out her soul. So Lisa says to my mother, would you like to come and stay with my family for the weekend and get away from all this? And my mother is the most resourceful person I had ever known. So she's never going to say no. So the way Lisa would say it is, your mother came for the weekend and stayed 4 months. So during that time, my mother and Lisa and Paul, Lisa's husband, I consider Lisa and Paul my mother and father just as much as I consider my biological mother and father my mother and father. So I use first names, but my sister calls them mom and dad, since my parents have passed, my biological parents. But they worked to get me back. So they got me back from the state, and I went to go live with Lisa, Paul, and their 3 children, and my mother at their home. But then my father got out of prison. My mother left with me, but within a week, my mother was like back on their doorstep, like, I can't do this. Can you take my baby?
Yeah.
So I get emotional talking about it because, like, you think about what could have happened.
Yeah.
And how lucky and blessed I was to have them. But they took me, and I spent the first 2.5 years of my life with them, and they were like, that's my family, Just a sip of coffee to take a sip.
It's okay. My eyes are wet too.
Like, our eyes are leaking over here.
I know.
What a true and real blessing to meet actual angels on earth, right?
Yeah. No, they really are. So they took me, and they had their 4th child, and those are my brothers and sisters. I've known them pretty much since I was born. And my mother, she gets pregnant with my sister, and then she makes a decision that she's going to get clean, and she does. And then she gets my sister and I back from the state. So I'm 2.5, maybe almost somewhere between 2.5 and 3.
Yeah.
And my mother gets set up on all the government assistance programs, gets an apartment in one of those new complexes in the suburbs of Boston, so Burlington, Massachusetts. And it's a nice area. It's like mostly middle class, but they have to have a few Section 8 units. So it's not like we're in the hood or the ghetto or anywhere dangerous. We're in this nice suburb. But we go and we live with my mother, and for the first time, we're like a family of three. And then Lisa and Paul, they move their family to Southern Maine, but we stay in contact. But at this point, I become like really angry. And I'm like violent towards my sister. And I have vague memories of it, but I remember going to a therapist. I just didn't know it was anger management. And I remember growing up, my mother and I were very close. We were like, because my father was, he was never in the home with all of us, but we had a relationship with him. But it was always my mother and my sister and I. But there was a lot of pressure there because everyone was like, you're the man of the house, even from a young age. So my mother would confide in me and like was very honest. So she always sat me down and was like, Nick, your anger. So I talked to some adults and they would tell me about how I was at that time. And I was an angry kid, but how could I not? Because during those, the two most developmentally important periods in one's life is 0 to 3 and then adolescent years. So you can cause a lot of damage in those first 3 years, and you get another chance in adolescence. But like, depending on what goes on in those first 3 years, like it's very, very hard for some people to overcome.
It's life changing, and it really does affect our neural pathways and how our brain is developed at a young age, from that 0 to 3 age, and then how you go on in terms of your lifeline, your trajectory of life, and the foundation of which you have been presented life. The stories that you then tell yourself and how you view yourself is stemmed from such a young age that it can affect everything. And as I hear you,
go ahead, Lindsay.
Just as I hear you talk about the anger, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge how many angry young boys, young adolescents are around today. And that's just really one of the beauty, I think, of you being a motivational speaker and working with youth is so powerful, because the young boys in today's world need people like you as a role model, and to hear your vulnerability be shared, because a lot of young boys don't understand what they're experiencing. They know they're experiencing really intense emotions. They don't understand why or what to call it or how to control it. And it changes everything. It changes everything. And everything that you're talking about hits very close to home in terms of my personal life. So this is like, we didn't get into all the specifics. And so this is definitely very raw emotion for me to be feeling all of this, but I appreciate your candor and being able to share this with such a level of honest authenticity,
Yeah, I think it's half nature and half understanding that it's important to be honest about my experiences, because like you said, there's young men, there's young women going through situations and they just don't know what to do with it all, what they're feeling, and they don't understand their reactions, and they're unaware of their patterns, and it's confusing and it's destructive, and it's very hard to overcome if you don't have anyone to point you in the right direction. And that's, as a 35-year-old man and someone who's has some understanding and has done some work and is working towards being a better man, because I have a long way to go.
Don't we all?
Yeah.
Don't we all?
All a work in progress, friend. I mean,
so did you find that the anger was carrying through even throughout your adolescence, through middle school, high school, and forward? Can you share a little bit more about how would you describe yourself during those more pivotal periods of life?
So
whether it be you or how teachers saw you, how friends saw you, whatever the case.
So this is the other half of it. If you would have asked my middle school and high school teachers, they would have said the opposite of what I'm describing to you from my younger years. But at that point, I was with Lisa and Paul and their 4 kids full time. So a lot happened in between that time, and I'll just 1 minute because I know we don't have forever. But when I was 5 years old, my mother was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS. So she had been clean for a long time, but like AIDS just like ravished her and ravaged her. And
Yeah.
it just took a toll on her body, and she was lonely and isolated. And it was just hard in the early 90s to live with that virus, because people,
So
even if they
difficult.
understood anecdotally, they didn't understand, and they were
Yeah.
scared of it. And I watched that. I remember
Yeah.
at 12 years old, my mother, we lived in the complex, and she went to go get into the pool. We were at Maine. No. I was there. I think it was during the summer. So we spent summers with our mother at this point. I remember coming home from playing with my friends, and my mother was crying because they kicked her out of the pool. And
Oh, wow.
this comes back to being like the man of the house and having everything on your shoulders. And my mother, God rest her soul, she did put a lot of that on me. And my father did as well, because he's like, I'm not there. You have to protect your sister and your mother. So I carried a lot of that with me. So she's like crying, and she's like, Nick, go do something. They kicked me out of the pool. But maybe I was a little older. I think I was maybe 13, 14 at this time. And you're a teenage boy, and you want to protect your mother, but I didn't know, I didn't know what to do. So through this
What
time,
13-year-old would?
Yeah.
what I learned how to do is shut down. So, my mother she was a very emotional woman, and for good reason. She ended up relapsing after 7 years. So a lot of times we were dealing with AIDS and her addiction, which is how we ended up going back with Lisa and Paul. And we bounced back and forth for a couple of years, like 3rd grade in Maine, 4th grade in Massachusetts, 5th grade in Maine. Then we were going to be back in Massachusetts. Then we were taken by the state, and we spent 2 weeks in foster care. Then we go back to Maine, and we stayed there indefinitely. And the arrangement came like weekends and summers and school breaks with our mother. So whenever we were with my mom, I wasn't a kid anymore. I was the man of the house. And you won't, but when I was in Maine, I could be like a kid, man. And I didn't have to worry about taking care of my sick mom or my sister or, fending for ourselves or like missing practice or anything. I could like join sports. And then I just really began to thrive.
You had permission.
Yeah.
You had permission to be a kid. I mean, I just want to label that experience for a moment. And because frankly, it happens a lot, which is the parentification of a child is what it's called. The parentification of a child, when a parent is leaning on their child for that emotional support, and they just simply lack the capacity to play the role of the parent who provides the emotional attunement to the child in the way that they need. It's something that I see it all the time. I see it every single day in my line of work. And it's, I think the more education around it with caregivers, the better. That's really where my advocacy comes in as a therapist and working with families, is because I don't think our parents knowingly, willfully do this with the understanding of the harm that and the harm that it can cause a child in terms of depriving your right to being a kid and learning what it is to have fun. And so I just want to take a moment to label that. That's all. Thank you.
And I understand it, because my mother, she was lonely and she was going through a lot. She was battling, 2 very hard things to battle, diseases to battle. And when we were there, and it's not like it was all, bad. My mother, she was like, she did her best to give us a great childhood. And I think she did do that in a lot of ways. She was very loving. We never felt unloved. We never felt neglected. There were some things that had happened as a result of her addiction that, were not appropriate for anyone, like, the pawning of the stereo,
Right.
things like that. But we never went without food. And I have lifelong friends from that period of my life. And I got, I was outside, I was playing, and I did have a chance to be a kid. But, I had to learn how to compartmentalize when I was with my mother, because you just never knew what you were going to get from day to day, whether you're going to get sick mom or lively mom, where she's, at the stove cooking up like brajol or like a delicious Italian dinner, or whether she was sick in bed all day and we were like, and I was like checking on her, just worried about her. And there was just a lot of worry and fear because AIDS was scary at that time,
Immensely.
and she survived a long time with full-blown AIDS. But I mean, I watched her go through it. I mean, at one point she had all these lesions all over her body. I mean, some were like that big and they were just like deep and pussy. And I remember at like 13, 14 years old, I'd go into her room and I'd just like, she'd be sleeping and she would sleep deeply. And I would just check them because I wanted to see if they were healing.
Yeah.
And that was my way. And if she was like that, I would clean the house because it was the only thing I had control over, and it made me feel better.
Yeah.
And our house wasn't a mess. My mother kept a really nice house, but like I realized during transitions in my life, I clean. I put things in order.
Yeah.
So when I graduated college, I like came home and I just reorganized my whole room.
Yeah.
And
It
I
makes us feel
learned
more in control.
more in control. And then I made that connect. I was like, okay, I did that as a kid. I would like clean the whole house if my mother was sick in bed because I had control over that. And it like settled me.
Yeah. It's really common. I mean, everything that you're talking about is really, really common. I think when things kind of shift, when we look at, at what point does this helpful / healthy coping skill go awry? And, as with all things, moderation is important. And while I heard you kind of mention, whenever you were with Lisa and Paul, you were able to kind of thrive. If we were to kind of like fast track a bit in terms of like college years for you, this can play out in a lot of different ways as well. So it's like, what track did you find yourself on? Because also part of this coping is like, once you become an adult and you don't have to assume the role of being a caregiver for your caregiver, and that parentified role, that's when oftentimes a lot of shifts take place. Like, oh my gosh, I am my own person. I can be angry and express it. I can be promiscuous and express it. I can do these things and express it and be me and stand in all my glory, regardless of the consequences of it. So I'm really curious to know, how did things transition after you were officially an adult, so to speak? What did that look like? Because at some point you transitioned into wanting to do this walk.
Yeah.
So there had to have been some stuff that happened in between.
There were. So like I said, I began to thrive. I became like a straight A student and I was a 3-sport athlete. And I was, by the time senior year rolled around, I mean, I was like a captain, a 3-sport captain. I was a part of like student council leadership. I was honor roll. Like I had
all
a lot
the things,
going.
Literally all the things.
All the things. I was trying Amber. Like I had gone to my older brother Sam's graduation when I was 11. And I remember watching everyone walk and get their diploma. And I saw some people with like these tassels and these stashes. And I go to Lisa, I was like, what are those? And they're like, oh, well, those are people who did well. And at 11 years old, I was like, I want those. So I collected those. So when I walked, to get my diploma, I had like all the tassels and the honor society fashion. Honor society, I don't know what the hell that is still, but I had it.
But you did great. But I did it.
Yeah, I did it. I had like some medal of honor that I still don't understand, but I think I have it in a chest back at home. And like I was really clicking on all cylinders, and I got into Colby College in Maine, which I could have never have fathomed for myself because I didn't come from that world. So I was in southern Maine at a very working class town, went to a very working class school. So I had no idea about some of the elite private schools that existed in New England. But I ended up at Colby. But that summer before I got there, my mother had passed away. And
oh gosh,
there was a lot of guilt there. And that came a lot with the, what do you call it? The parentification and feeling like, especially as an 18-year-old young man, I still felt like I needed to protect my mother. So, I was so busy with like graduation and everything. I hadn't seen her in 2 months. And I was at this youth leadership conference at URI down in Rhode Island. And I got the call that my mother wasn't going to make it through the night from Lisa. And we go up to Boston and we go to the ICU, but I had grown up visiting my mother in the hospital. So I didn't think anything of it. But when I like walked into her room, I was like, holy shit, like this is it. And my mother, with the wisdom she had, she tried to prepare my sister and I for this since we were kids. Like, I'm not always going to be here. I'm not always going to be there. But you don't want to hear that when you're a kid. So, it's like, yeah, but you're here. But like, this was it. And I was like, I knew this was a goodbye. And I just like started bawling my eyes out right there in the hospital room. And I just wanted to run because all I knew at that point was like how to escape, and run away from emotions. Cause that's what I had practiced.
It worked.
For, a long time. I didn't know any better, but I just distracted myself that whole summer and until college. And what I tell the kids at the schools that I speak at, I'm like, you can run away from things, but it's going to catch up to you. And there are a few things that can like speed that up. And I was running right into it, right? Major transitions in life, moving off to college, substance abuse, diving into the binge drinking culture, and then romantic relationships. I think within like 2 weeks, I had a crush on a girl. And you might have to repeat the question because I've lost the thread here. But I entered college and I didn't warn my mother properly. Never mind processed all the trauma that I had faced leading up to that point. And now, the reins were off. Here I was, So
well, at some point, I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No. I didn't know that I didn't know myself, and I didn't know that I relied on things to kind of validate myself, which is, I think, common for most adolescents.
Yeah.
But sometimes it can run a little deeper for people. Right.
All humans, adults included.
But sometimes it runs a little deeper and has, more severe consequences for people that haven't processed their trauma. So I became, I wasn't angry yet, but I became very, very promiscuous. And I relied on that to feel good about myself. Like, not to, I don't mean this to sound braggadocious or like arrogant, but like I did get a lot of attention from girls and it made me feel good.
Sure. Yeah.
So if I didn't feel good, I reached for that.
Yeah.
And not in healthy ways. So I was, I was engaging in unhealthy sexual behaviors, having a lot of unprotected sex, and not, treating women with the respect that I was taught, by my mother and, by Lisa and Paul. I'd grown up in the church and I knew as a Christian what was expected of me. So there was that aspect that I knew I was operating outside of what I knew to be right.
Yeah. The moral code that you've been trained around. Yeah. Sure. And
then when the drinking got bad, I mean, things just kind of spiraled out of control. And when you're in college, everyone else is drinking too. And a lot of people are doing dumb shit. So it doesn't register. You're just like, oh, I'm just
like, this is
and
normal.
And I was on the football team. So we're all running around like buffoons.
Of course. And it's getting reinforced tenfold by everyone.
Yeah. And we're competing, who can drink the most. But, I think around sophomore year of college, I just started blacking out or browning out most weekends. And then it started off like people were like, oh, Nick, you know what you did last night? I'm like, no. And then they'd tell me these funny stories and but then like, it just like turned dark. And then I was starting to do things I wasn't very proud of. So people were coming up to me, like you said, these nasty things and I was like, what? Like, that's like not me. So if you ask me how people would have described me in my adolescent years, they would have been like, always happy, optimistic, like got along with everybody. I mean, I still do, and I did then. I mean, I literally got along with everybody.
Yeah.
But I was saying these nasty things, and then eventually I was hearing these stories about me getting violent, and I think it started with my ex-girlfriend at the time. She told me when she was my ex-girlfriend when this happened. She told me one Sunday morning that I had like pushed her, and I was like, huh? And I couldn't remember. So there was like this disconnect. I was like, no, I'd never do that. I was like, yeah, you're telling me I did it. I believe you, but like it can't be as bad as it sounds. But then like other friends and acquaintances were coming up to me, and there was, some friends, female friends, who told me I'd like smack them or hit them just like randomly. And I'm like, who is this guy you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
But
this
there were no
can't be me.
consequences. There were no consequences, and people were still my friends. So
Sure.
I wasn't changing, and because I saw no reason to change.
Right.
And because
Well,
yeah.
Just when we're so dissociated from that reality, especially
Yeah.
when there's substances involved, you can, it's very easy to kind of push it away because it's not you, right? You're like, when you're in your sober mindset, it's like, that's not me. I wouldn't do that. Like, you must be exaggerating.
Right.
And it becomes very easy to blame shift or to minimize and kind of whatever. But at what point was there that accountability check where all of a sudden there was an epiphany where you said, holy shit, this is real. There is a problem and something's got to shift? Because when I met you, your personality was not like that. But then again, it's not like I hung around you a lot. So maybe it was, but you seemingly had gone through some kind of shift or transition by the time that we met.
Yeah. I in my sober mind, as you put it, like I'm like that. Like that's who I am. I believe at my core. But for some reason, when I was getting this drunk, something was coming out of me, and I didn't understand what it was or where it was coming from. But my father ended up passing away midway through my junior year of college, and my father and I weren't as close as I was with my mother. So I didn't shed a tear because that was the only way I knew how to honor him. Because I remember after my mother died, he called, and the first thing he said to me was, "Don't cry in front of my sister." And I was like, well, too late.
Yeah.
But I knew my father had a good heart, and he got along with a lot of people. He had a similar personality than I did, but he had like a perception of what it meant to be a man, and showing emotion was not one of them. So I thought strength was showing no emotion still at 21 years old. So the only way I knew how to honor my father was to not cry. So I don't mourn my father, and I'm back at school, and I'm just engaging in the same old stuff. I'm still drinking heavy, still super promiscuous, still just doing dumb stuff. And then I have a crush on a girl, and it looks like things are going well, but she doesn't want to be with me eventually. So I just fall into this depression, and like I'm depressed for months, and I'm like, this isn't me. Why am I so sad? And I think it's because this girl doesn't want to be with me. But it's like
the surface level
because
stuff.
it has to be that. Yeah, it can't be anything deeper. It has to be like that one thing.
And I didn't understand what I was. But Lisa, having known me my whole life, she comes up to one of my football games, and she's like, Nick, after the game, we're walking to the tailgate, and she tells Kiana, my sister, she's like, Kiana, run ahead. I got to talk to your brother. And she's like, Nick, you're depressed. And I'm like,
who are you even talking to? What are you talking about?
Who's Nick? What are you talking?
Me?
What are you talking about? Not me.
But honestly, in my head, like it took me 2 seconds to just be like, oh yeah, she's right. But I asked, I was like, how did you know? She's like, you ever had like a parent look at you like this?
Yeah. Like
she looks at me like, Nicholas, I've known you your whole life. I know. And then she prays for me. But I'm like, I leave there like, holy crap, man. Like I'm depressed. Like this is something other people deal with, not me, not the happy guy,
Yeah.
But I was, it just gave me a name for what I was walking through, but I just didn't know what to do with it. but a few months go by and I think I'm okay because I'm not missing practices. I'm not missing schoolwork. It's not that type of, one thing I have hard time giving myself credit for where I am today. I always like say it's because of Lisa and Paul and they were the as professors and teachers. But one thing I could do or did do, and I think it was practice through growing up in the circumstances I grew up in, is just like you get up in the morning and you do stuff anyway.
Yeah.
Regardless
right.
of how you feel.
Right. Yep.
But when I wasn't distracted by football or schoolwork or girls or partying, like there was like this sadness and I like couldn't shake it. But I sit down January of senior year and we had this Jan plan where you just take a class or do an independent study for the month. And my boy Lamont, one of my best friends in the world, he's like, last year I wrote an autobiography for credit. I was like, word? Like write about yourself for credit? Like count me.
That sounds like
in.
fun.
I was wondering how writing came into all this.
Right. 21.
Yeah.
Oh no, I'm 22 at the time. I'm like, I'm still looking for the easy credits.
Yeah. Right. You thought that was going to be easy, right? Writing about your life.
Right. I'm like, I know me.
See, that was a godsend moment right there. See, this is one of those things where hindsight pops in. That's a godsend moment. Like this guy saying he doesn't know how to cope. Let's give him that easy credit. He thinks he's going to get.
This.
He's got a funny sense of humor, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. And no, I truly believe it was like God's way of forcing me to open my eyes. But I found a professor I knew, Nikki Singh, loved this woman. She's like, yeah, I'll sponsor you. And she's like, but you take your time. I'm like, all right, yeah, take my time.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, there's a week left in Jan plan. Like I hadn't written a word. I'm like, let me just go find somewhere to write. And I just start from the beginning, the stories that I was told by my mother and Lisa and Paul. Like, I was born 2 months premature and I died, but, someone had prayed and I had been given life. There's so much more to that story, but Paul was actually praying for my mother because she was on the prayer card at the church. And he didn't know, but, pray for Cindy. My mother's name was Cindy and the baby. And then the way Paul tells it is that God put on his heart to pray for life. So he prayed for life, not knowing, I guess, that I had either already passed away or was going to pass away. And this was even before Lisa had gone to my mother. So there, in my mind, there was already this connection God was making because he knew that I was going to need this family. So I'm just like writing this all out. And like, I'm seeing that every time I needed someone or something, like God provided the Lorians. Like we never went without. It was all this love in my life. And I'm like, man, things could have been really bad, but like, look where I am. But more than that, I was starting to see patterns and I was starting to name some of the experiences I was going through. I was like, oh man, I was writing about this experience when I was 10 years old, when I was awoken by my sister at 3 a.m. because my mother had fallen through a glass table because she was groggy, either off her medication or she was on the nod, which is, I'm not even sure which. But I woke up to like a pool of blood in the kitchen and my mother just like half out of it with her like hand just like dripping blood. And, I'm 10 years old. So we like recall 911, but it's like a jarring thing to be woken up. But I never talked about that experience with anyone. But here at 22 years old, I'm writing it out and I'm like, holy crap, man, I was scared out of my mind and like worried. For my mother.
This allowed you such a great opportunity to process, like, and to actually feel the feels and be able to like see the words. Because I think something I'm learning, Lindsay encouraged me this year to start a writing plan because I'm very like hesitant and like I push off actually putting words on paper because it freaks me out because of exactly what you're saying right now. Like when you see that writing in paper, it's like suddenly, oh shit, like that's a thing. And like what like you say easy credit. So first of all, your brain was in a way different space in your 20s than mine has ever been, because if you had said, write your life story, easy credit would not have been what my brain went to. My brain would have said,
He wasn't
heck
thinking like
no.
that. His
That
brain
sounds
didn't realize what he was setting
terrible.
himself up for.
No, but
had
I
no idea.
love that. Like, what a powerful and like transitional moment for you as you're in that, you know,
Mhm.
junior, senior time of college and like getting ready to quote unquote be a real adult and walk out
Right.
into the world. Like that 100% sets you up for this crazy ass walk across the United States. Like
Yeah.
now it all makes sense.
Well, I mean, I think some of that too, and just full disclosure, I actually had a class as well in undergrad, same assignment, same thought process. It'll be an easy credit.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
I just want to say it's bullshit. It was
Yeah.
not easy. It was very hard. And I think one of the risks of entering into a class like that is the unintentional flooding, which is what I'm hearing you talk about too. Is like flooding is this concept of when we talk too much too soon about a lot of trauma and just dump it. It's just like full-blown trauma dumping and just putting it out there. And you don't realize how upsetting and jarring and how much stuff you're bringing up until it's too late and it's already been said. I mean, even with these podcast episodes, when we have guest speakers on, there's a reason why, you know, we send something out beforehand so that your mind kind of has some adjustment period before you come onto the show. Because the last thing we want is someone to feel like they've shared and overshared or feel like, you know, it's too much and they leave here feeling flooded. And likewise, I feel these writing assignments can do that, particularly in college when it's like, yeah, I'll just wait till like the night before it's due. Let me just write my entire life right here before it's due and just hope I get an A. No less completely screw up your mental health, but we'll get to that one later.
Mental health, whatever. Oh man.
So you did it. You did the thing.
You did
I
the
hope you
thing.
got your credits.
I passed it in late. Nikki was more than gracious because once I got going, I mean, you're right. I was, I guess, flooded, but I cried through the whole process. I didn't expect it to be therapeutic as I shared, and it was. And like, I don't know, it helped me come to terms. It was powerful, especially for me, a young man at that point, to be like, okay, I had gone through these tough experiences. I still didn't know to call it trauma. I didn't know to call it that till probably my 30s. When I sat down and talked to this woman, told her my story. She's like, oh, you went through childhood trauma. I'm like, huh?
What? Not me.
A lot of it, actually.
Yeah. And I was just telling her, you know, what happened from 1 to 3 years old or 0 to 3 years old. And she's like, oh yeah, childhood trauma. I'm like, yeah, but I don't remember. She's like, your body does.
Oh, yeah, it does.
I was like, that makes sense because there is a physiological process to, you know, consequence to some of the things that you go through before your brain's developed enough to understand. And I've had to navigate that. And I think, you know, shutting down was one of those things, and because it was involuntary.
It's a primal response. There's nothing wrong with what you were doing. That was a primal response to a perceived threat and just what you learned to cope. That was your survival mode.
Right. And it's one thing when your moms are trying to get you to talk, you know, both, especially my biological mother always wanted me to talk about my feelings, but I would just sit there silent. But it really came to a head when I started, you know, having these romantic relationships, and I had a girlfriend and she's like upset and I like can't communicate or identify what I'm thinking or feeling. And it's just, there was no foundation, emotional foundation there to build a functional relationship off of. And what I've learned now is that like adolescence is when you build your emotional foundation for your life. And like, I didn't do any, you know, I didn't do any of it. And I'm way better now at 35, but you know, my wife, she knows that sometimes I'll come to her a day or two later with like finally having processed something or with something more to say, because I can't always in the moment articulate what's going on.
And congratulations on being human.
Yes,
right?
Congratulations on being a real live person.
Because the thing is that some people are verbal processors, and not to put people in category here, but that tends to be more like females. Women tend to be more verbal processors where we just want to talk it out in the moment, in the moment, in the moment. Whereas you do see more from like the cultural norms of how men are raised, you know, it's the shut down or we'll just like walk away from it. So you do tend to see that the men are from Mars, women are from Venus kind of things, where it's like you might need a couple days to process it and come back to it. The key is just the communication piece of saying, we're going to come back to it. We will talk about it, but I need this and you need that. And
the
we'll
coming
unite.
back is important. And we will, and I'm actually adamant about like talking things through in the moment because of, I don't know, I'm very much like the don't go to bed angry, you know, camp. And we do a pretty good job talking things through, but me personally can't process everything in that moment. So
Yeah.
we'll get to a place where we've like pretty much reconciled, but then I'll like think of something else and it'll be the next day. And it just takes me that long to process something. And it's probably a little nature, a lot of practice, and that's okay. And that's one of the things that understanding your trauma helps with. It's like, okay,
Oh, yeah.
this is how it's affected my life. This is how it's manifested in my life. So I can navigate this and I can let people close to me and who care for me, I can help them help me navigate it. So it's, you know, people aren't getting angry or reactive. It's just who you are and how you are. And it just, I don't know.
These
It
are
works
the
so
moments
now.
in our household. I too struggle with processing emotions in the moment. So I'm an atypical female of, I don't want to talk about it. I want to pretend it's not there because I don't know what to do with it. And in our house, I have a tendency to use humor as a coping mechanism or like a way to diffuse situations. So typically what Eric has learned, if I'm in that space, I say something like, I can't feel my hands or I can't feel my legs. And that's his like, oh, like pause. We need to stop. Like, this is not, because I literally in my brain, the only thing that comes out is, do I still have hands? Like I can't process what's happening right now. And I have reached my critical breaking point. And like, that's our like roll back. Like we'll tackle the rest of this later. Everything's fine. Like we have to feel safe again. We have to feel secure again. Like we have to be like, whoo-saw, right? Like, and just being able to communicate that with a partner and with a friend to say, oh, okay, cool. Like we don't have beef. Like we don't have a problem. We'll talk about it, but we just need to like step out of it for the moment. And I think that's super important. And I love that you found a space. Now, not only do you get to do that for your partner and your child, but this whole group of young people that you're mentoring and you're speaking to, and you get to model like how to be human. And I like, we say that and it sounds so cliche and it sounds so like just off the cuff, but truly normalizing these patterns and normalizing these behaviors and these skills is so important, because kids, like, they have to see you do it. They can hear you talk about it, but until you actually model that behavior and it's real, like my kids see me, like they see me go through those situations and I see Hazel like, oh, like I felt that yesterday and now I know what to do with it. So it's cool to get to teach that next generation something completely different.
Yeah. And man, Amber, let me tell you, like Kenzo, he's 20 months, but I have been tested. Like,
listen, you don't have to tell me.
I thought I had patience for days. I thought like I was composed, but like I've had to remind myself of the things I've learned, because you know, I find myself being quick to anger sometimes. And I'm like, oh man. And I'm trying, you know, it's a whole new phase of my life. I'm trying to learn how to navigate, because I thought I had a handle on it. And now I'm like, okay, I don't have as strong a handle on it as I thought I did. And I'm, you know, you're always trying to figure things out. And I know one thing I had when I was younger is I always had a physical outlet. Like I played sports year round, and I'm learning, you know, I had this thought in the last couple of weeks. I'm like, okay, I need that back, because I'm starting to tense up with anger and frustration sometimes. And I'm like, I didn't really do that through my young adult years and adolescence. I was like, okay, what's changed? I was like, you know what? I could go on the football field and run around for an hour and a half. I could go on the basketball court and shoot. I was in the gym 4 times a week, working out for football during the off season. Like I had a way to
Mhm.
just like get it out. But I'm not doing anything now. I'm like, I need it back. And but this goes back to what you said. The important thing always is to, you know, is to return. So an outlet can quickly be a distraction. You know, when I was
Yep.
young, there were distractions because I never returned to the
Yeah.
issues. I didn't know any better. But now I
Yeah.
know better. So if I'm going to swim or going to the gym because I'm angry, it will help me alleviate it. But I got to return to that because you can't leave it unresolved, or, you know, you got to figure it out.
Yeah. Lindsay does a great job. And something she's taught me over the last couple of years is like to put it in a box, put it on a shelf with a category, with a label, tell yourself like
Mhm.
you're coming back to that thing, but also
Mm.
take the time to move your body, release the tension, like get yourself to a level where you can carefully walk through that. And it's
Mhm.
not
Yeah.
done like in heightened times of emotions, you can't really process or walk through
Yeah.
big things. And
No.
Yeah. I mean, I just know sometimes people have said, like, you're kind of robotic with your emotions sometimes, Linz. Or like, how are you able to compartmentalize things so well? And it's like, you, it, well, for starters, I guess it is kind of my own trauma response aspect of
yeah,
like my own shit and what I've been through and what I've learned to keep me safe. But I really do believe there's a lot of power and understanding. You're allowed to put things on the shelf so long as you come back to the shelf.
Mhm.
yes.
It is, you don't put it away and put it under the bed and never go back to it again because that's where things fester. But
Yeah.
yeah, so long as you give yourself permission to say, you know what, this is really hard right now, and I'm going to put this on the shelf. I recognize it's
Mhm.
there. I need to work through it, and I'm going to come back to it whenever I'm in an okay state to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Lindsay, I'm curious because I think one thing I battle is the thought that like, okay, it's okay if you can't deal with it right now. Because I think for a while I felt deficient and
Mm,
Ooh.
being unable to calm myself in the moment or deal with
yeah,
something in the moment and putting it on the shelf and coming back to it later. And maybe it's a
yeah.
competitive man thing. Like, no, like I can deal with this now. Like, and I can do it in a rational way without letting my emotions, you know, control me or whatever. But I wonder if you've encountered for yourself or with other people in discussions, maybe, or, you know, how do people feel in general about, you know, putting something on the shelf and coming back to it? Does it make them feel like less capable? Or you
Mm.
know, it is just something I've dealt with myself.
I know I can speak for me. For me, it does not make me feel less capable. And the reason why is because um, I know I'm someone who has to sit for a little bit, kind of like
Mhm.
how you saw me staring off into La La Land when we met.
Yeah.
I've always been that person where I have to let things marinate a little bit. Um, and I think because of my own upbringing, which had a lot of its own trauma, I had to learn to be very mindful and conscientious of how the people around me were feeling at all times,
Mhm.
at all times. And that deprived me of my ability to feel my feelings in the moment
Mhm.
because that that could then mean that I was potentially unsafe because then I was not on guard. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah.
And so I would say learning to put it on the shelf was something that to this day I understand. Okay, feeling really uneasy about this thing right now. And I want to work through that because the way that I look at it is that when we're feeling triggered or something is prompting a pretty significant mood shift that's making us kind of have a check ourselves moment,
Mhm.
that is guiding us on where our healing needs to take place.
Mm.
Yeah.
So our triggers point us in the direction of where our healing is and our phases of healing and where our next steps are to keep elevating. And for me, I take that as data because that's kind of how my brain works too. It's like, okay, why am I feeling triggered right now? Or why did I get that upset? Why am I
Mhm.
feeling like that heat rush through my chest, or my hands getting clammy, or whatever the physiological symptoms are. Because sometimes, going back to affect identification and not knowing the name for the emotion,
Right.
a lot of times for kids especially, you don't know names to emotions, but you can feel energy in your body.
Yeah.
Right.
You might not be able to label it or know that it's anger or know that it's sadness or embarrassment, but you can feel, your face getting red or your splotchiness getting like whatever, so you
Yeah.
can feel that. And I think that just sort of coming back to those moments of checking myself is like, I think I have some unresolved trauma there, or I have some healing that I need to expand on. And that's why putting it on the shelf and coming back to it works for me,
Yeah.
because I see it actually as not like I've done something wrong, but this is an opportunity for me to keep growing what I'm going through.
Well, and honestly, I feel like we could do an entire episode on that, because putting it on the shelf is such a polar opposite to sweeping it under a rug, right?
Yeah.
Like those are two different thought processes in my brain. And that was like my aha moment when you shared that maybe a year and a half ago. I was like, oh, that's a much better, like physically, I can see that visually in my mind, and I can see the shelf, and I can see that it's something I'm going to come back to. And it would, to me, it feels very healthy. It feels very like I am in control, and I have the power and the autonomy to say, this is a thing that needs to be dealt with. However, it does not have to be dealt with in this exact moment. It needs, like, I need rest, or for me, I need to go eat some food and have a little bit of water before we tackle that thing.
Yes.
Like,
There's this wonderful acronym that I reference a lot called HALT.
yes.
And this was I actually was a big proponent of Al-Anon and went to Al-Anon a lot, which is for family members and loved ones of alcoholics. And a big part of Al-Anon and AA and NA, they say, when you're getting that urge to use, or that urge to, so just to kind of label it real fast, that in Al-Anon, the addiction is not to the substance, the addiction is to the addict. So it's still addiction, but you're addicted to trying to fix the addict or the alcoholic, rather than the addict or alcoholic is addicted to the substance. So still a lot of growth and learning in these kind of programs, but a big part of those programs, they talk about when you are feeling some kind of big emotion or an urge to control or to use or whatever, you should halt. So that means when you are feeling hungry, angry, lonely, tired, check yourself. Why are you feeling that need? Are you feeling hungry, angry, lonely, tired? And if you are, take care of that need, and then pause, and then do the thing that you thought you needed to do before, and see if it was still relevant,
It's a good check-in point and a good self reflection. So I'm conscious of the fact that we've been talking for a very long time. We've covered some amazing areas of your life and your story, and just how you've become the person that you are today. I'm curious to know, as we kind of wrap things up and put a nice little bow on it, is there something that you wanted to make sure that our listeners heard today, or something like one big idea that you wanted them to walk away from this episode, as a reflection or an idea, or just anything of that nature?
That's a good question. One thing that I really hope for people to discover is just kind of like who they are. And one thing I really talk about extensively with the students I speak to is the power in writing out your story. Because I think I use that as a reference point in my life, because I really think it was a turning point. And what it did was it helped me be aware of myself, my patterns. It helped me name my experiences and the feelings I was going through during those times. And ultimately what it did is it helped me reorient myself. So, revisit the vision I had for my life, but not just like where I wanted to go career wise or anything like that, but more so who I wanted to be as a man. Because what was happening is I was falling short, not only for my expectations, but for anyone's expectations, really. I mean, I was drinking, sleeping around, being violent, nothing good. Well, some good. That's not good though.
Not good, but it led to a higher good that you're now
Yes.
paying forward and having lots of service to the communities for now.
Yeah, so it helped me reorient myself and just like revisit the vision I had for the man I wanted to
Mhm.
be. And once you have that vision, then it's something to work towards. So it, some people may talk about, um, manifesting things in your life or attraction theory. To me, without having read up on that stuff, to me, that's just okay. You have this goal in your mind, this vision for your life. So if you have that, then everything you're engaging in or everything you're going to engage in, you kind of hold up to that. And if it's not
Mhm.
getting you there, you kind of you prune your life.
Yeah.
And what I
Yep.
always wanted was a family. That's one thing I know I always wanted. And I wanted a healthy marriage because I saw Lisa and Paul
Mhm.
and how, how much love was in that home. And we were in a 900 square foot colonial with 8 of us in one bathroom, but it was
Oh
great.
my gosh.
I loved it, every
Yeah.
second of it. And I
Yeah.
wanted that. So knowing that I wanted a family and healthy relationships really helped me to work towards being the man I knew I could be
Mhm.
and knew I was at some level. So I would just encourage people to just like write out your story or journal or whatever you need to do to just kind of like unpack
Yeah.
some of the things from your past so you can move forward. And I really think
Mhm.
it'll help your emotional health. And that's really the key to resilience in my mind.
I love that. And I really appreciate you putting an emphasis on that. Writing can help in so many ways, whether it's just a daily brain dump or if
Yeah.
it is getting into the nitty gritty of different stages of life or the things that you've experienced.
Yeah.
Nick, I'd like to ask, you mentioned that now you're living in Los Angeles and
Yeah.
you have a whole, camp and program that you do. Can you tell our listeners more about that so that if they are interested in the area of kind of taking their kid over to your camp or what have you, can you say like how do people find you or sign up for the camp or and what your offerings are?
Yeah, for the camp side of things, again, it's for kids 6 to 14, and really what I like to focus on is being active and just having fun. So it's mostly a day camp during
Mhm.
vacations in summer. So you can find me at campnick.com or nick@campnick.com is the email, and you just if anyone wanted to send their kid to camp. And we do beach days, we do hike days, we play a lot of
Very
dodgeball, capture
cool.
the flag.
That's
Sometimes we'll
awesome.
scooter 4 miles to like Japantown and get ice cream, and we do all types of stuff. I like to,
Yeah, you're prepping
yeah,
them to go across the country. That's what you're
That's
really
that's really what
exactly
doing.
I'm
what's
doing.
happening. I love
Well,
it.
it's as much for the kids as it is for me because I hate doing the same thing every day. Honestly, honestly, so I like to do something a little different every day.
And then in
Um,
addition, it's my understanding that you also work with adults and helping them learn how to become better speakers as well, and do motivational speaking at different schools or what have you. So, what is the website that people can go on to learn more about your offerings in that realm?
so in the speaking realm, they could visit nickrtucker.com. And if you're a part of a school or a college, or if you run some sort of organization or even a business and you want to do some public speaking workshops, I can do that. But what I love to do is I love to stand in front of audiences and just share my story, a lot of what I shared today and the life lessons I've learned, and hopefully, you know, impart something to someone who needs it. Is planting seeds is what I like to say I'm doing.
Well, you've
I love
planted a
that.
lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that you've done a really wonderful job in kind of outlining your story to us and our listeners today. And I have heard some of your speaking events that have been posted online, and you're very good at what you do.
Thank
So
you.
I do hope that things continue to blossom in your world because you have been through a lot and have a lot of wisdom to impart among today's youth in a lot of ways.
And I'm trying to retire my wife.
Oh, I like it.
That's my pipe dream, but it's something to work towards, whether it happens
Hey,
or
that's
not.
okay.
Didn't win
That's
the
all
Mega
right.
Millions.
That.
I bought a
Yet.
ticket, but I didn't win the Mega Millions.
Not yet, at least.
Next time.
Yeah, next time it's at 1.3 billion. It was from Lebanon, Maine, which is the town that went to my high school. So
Oh
it
my
was
gosh.
almost
So you were
So
so
close.
close.
it's so close, but so far.
Oh my gosh, Nick, it's been so fun talking
It's
with
been
you.
fun.
Thank you for sharing your story with us. Thank you for making our eyes leak and for just all of the emotion and all of the fun
All
of the
about leaky
conversation.
eyes.
Yeah,
Leaky
I
eyes
mean,
will make the-
You really put us through it today, man.
you did. That was a roller coaster, but thank you. Just very, very grateful for you sharing your story.
No, it was a pleasure to be here, and I thank the both of you for having me.
Absolutely. All right, to our listeners, just a reminder, please subscribe on YouTube at What the Fox Podcast and follow us on all of the social channels that you may use. But more importantly, we would really appreciate if you were to rate us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever your platform of choosing is. Your ratings help get us boosted in the algorithm, and we could really use your help so that new listeners can keep finding us. So thank you so much, everyone. And until then, we will see you next Tuesday.
Bye, guys.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.